The following is an encore presentation of Everything Everywhere Daily. In the last days of the First World War, an event occurred which resulted in the rapid collapse of the German monarchy and ultimately hastened the end of the war. The event was sparked by sailors in the German High Seas Fleet, who after suffering from months of low morale, finally decided to stop taking orders. Learn more about the Kiel Mutiny and how it shaped the outcome of the First World War and the future of Germany on this episode of Everything Everywhere Daily. This episode is sponsored by newspapers.com. If you listen to this podcast, then you probably love history. And if you love history, then look no further than newspapers.com, your ultimate resource into exploring history. Newspapers.com is like a time machine. You can find out what happened on the day you were born or how significant moments in history were reported when they actually happened. You can see for yourself what newspapers at the time had to say about humans landing on the moon or the end of World War II. With over 800 million digitized pages from over 24,000 newspapers spanning 3 centuries, newspapers.com provides an unparalleled gateway to the past, with papers from the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and many other countries. For Everything Everywhere Daily listeners, newspapers.com is extending a discount of 20% off on a Publisher Extra subscription. Just use the code EVERYTHINGEVERYWHERE at checkout. Uncover the extraordinary with newspapers.com today and use the code EVERYTHINGEVERYWHERE at checkout. This episode is sponsored by Curiosity Daily. Hey everyone, I wanted to tell you about Curiosity Daily, the award-winning podcast from Discovery, a podcast that covers the latest science and technology news from around the world. 3 times a week, the award-winning Curiosity Daily podcast will help you get smarter about the world around you. In less than 10 minutes, you'll get a unique mix of research-based life hacks, the latest science and technology news, and much more. Co-hosts Nate Bonham and Callie Gade will help you learn about your mind and body, outer space, the depths of the sea, and how history shaped the world into what it is today. Recent episodes have discussed how scientists are using AI to talk to animals, how researchers found a hidden chamber in the Great Pyramid of Giza, and how people with curly hair may actually have an evolutionary advantage. If you're a curious person, and let's face it, if you're listening to this podcast you are, then listen to Curiosity Daily wherever you listen to this show. Once again, Curiosity Daily. To understand the Kiel Mutiny, we need to know where Germany and the German Navy was entering November 1918. Most of the historical focus of World War I deals with trench warfare on the Western Front. However, the war was also fought at sea. In 1916, the Battle of Jutland was fought in the North Sea between the German and British navies. It wasn't just the largest naval battle of the war, but also, in terms of total tonnage, the largest naval battle in history. Technically, the British suffered significantly higher losses than the Germans did, but because they had such an overwhelmingly larger navy, the end result was that the German Navy was never able to operate outside of the Baltic Sea. U-boats still played a major part in Germany's naval strategy, but its surface fleet was for the most part sidelined. Not only were they sidelined, but resources were transferred elsewhere in the war effort. That meant for about 2 years, the crew on surface ships, like battleships and battlecruisers, mostly did nothing, and as such they were also given sharply reduced rations. After the Battle of Jutland, morale amongst German sailors dropped further and further. Discontent was in the air as early as August of 1917, when the 350-man crew of the battleship Prinz Regent Luitpold staged a protest in the port city of Wilhelmshaven. In typical German military efficiency, 2 of the leaders of the protest were shot and others were thrown into prison. The protest was quashed, but the discontent was still festering below the surface. In the fall of 1918, the handwriting was on the wall for the German military. The Allies were winning the war of attrition, especially since the injection of supplies, money, and troops from the United States within the last year. On September 30th, Georg von Hertling resigned as the German Chancellor, and he was replaced with Prince Maximilian of Baden. Prince Maximilian took office on October 3rd, and by October 5th, he was exchanging telegrams with U.S. President Woodrow Wilson about an armistice. By this time, Austria and Bulgaria, Germany's 2 major allies, had already signed independent armistice agreements, and Germany was now all alone. The precondition that Wilson demanded to even begin talking about an armistice was an immediate cessation of U-boat activity in the Atlantic. On October 20th, Prince Maximilian agreed to this condition, and on October 21st, all U-boats were recalled back to Germany. The problem was, this angered the head of the German Admiralty, Admiral Reinhard Scheer. Scheer decided that he was going to take matters into his own hands. On October 22nd, the day after the German Chancellor gave the order to end unrestricted submarine warfare, Admiral Scheer told Admiral Franz von Hipper, the head of the German High Seas Fleet, to prepare for an attack on the British Navy. This operation was dubbed Plan 19. Here I should note that since the Battle of Jutland 2 years earlier, the disparity between the British and the German navies only grew larger. The British had more of everything except for submarines, and now the American Navy would also be in the picture as well. Also, the German sailors, remember, had pretty much done nothing for the last 2 years. They were malnourished, and a wave of the Spanish flu had just torn through the fleet within the last month. Basically, Plan 19 was pretty close to a suicide mission. Even if by some miracle the Germans could win, what would they win? The war was still going poorly on the ground, and in the end, that was really all that mattered. Even worse, it appeared that Admiral Scheer knew exactly what the odds of success were. He said, quote, "An honorable battle by the fleet, even if it should be a fight to the death, would sow the seeds of a new German fleet of the future. There can be no future for a fleet fettered by a dishonorable peace." End quote. The German Chancellor was not notified about Plan 19. This was all being done from within the Admiralty without the government's approval. On October 24th, the order was given from the German naval headquarters in the city of Kiel to begin sailing out in preparation for the attack. The fleet began to assemble off the northwest coast of Germany near Wilhelmshaven, close to where the German and Dutch borders meet at the North Sea. On the night of October 29th and 30th, the ships were ordered to raise their anchors. And this was where the problem started. The sailors knew that this was basically a suicide mission and that the war was close to over. There was nothing to be gained at this point, and the sailors were going to have none of this. If you put yourself in their shoes, they really had nothing to lose. Either they get killed in combat, or they might get killed by their own side, and the former was looking a lot more likely than the latter. 3 ships in the 3rd Navy Squadron refused to raise their anchor, and the crews of the battleships SMS Thuringen and SMS Helgoland outright mutinied. 5 times the order was given, and 5 times it was ignored. The next day, on October 30th, the ships were threatened to be sunk by torpedo boats, and the mutineers soon surrendered. There were over 1,000 men who were arrested. The Admiralty had to call off the attack because they didn't have the loyalty of their sailors anymore. For the Admiralty, this wasn't the end of their problems, it was just the beginning. When the mutineers were brought back to the naval base at Kiel, the real problem started. Sailors stationed at Kiel, as well as dock workers who worked at the base, began to protest. 250 sailors and workers met on November 1st and demanded to the officers that the sailors be set free. The officers ignored their demands. The next day, on November 2nd, the protests had gained momentum, and hundreds began to protest outdoors with sailors and unions working together. On November 3rd, it had quickly grown to thousands of protesters. The military tried to subdue the crowd by shooting into it. They killed 7 protesters and injured 29, however, it only fanned the flames of the movement. On November 4th, the entire town and military base of Kiel were under the control of 40,000 sailors and soldiers. The slogan that they were protesting under was Frieden und Brot, which means bread and peace. That evening, the main organizing group in Kiel issued a list of demands known as the Kiel 14 Points. The 14 points were basically demands for an end to the war, basic rights like free speech, and improved living conditions. The army sent 40,000 troops of their own to put down the uprising, but it was to no avail, as most of them just joined the mutiny. The rebellion spread with shocking speed throughout Germany. Delegations from Kiel were sent to every major city in the country, and by November 7th, every coastal city was under the control of councils made up of sailors and workers. This was now the beginning of the German Revolution. All over Germany, in almost every major city, protests erupted and worker committees began to take over. The concern throughout the country was the prospect of a Russian-style revolution taking place in Germany. On November 9th, Kaiser Wilhelm II abdicated his throne, and Germany was declared a republic. Here I should note that the Kaiser was the emperor all over Germany, but there were also 22 different monarchs, including the Kaiser, which ruled individual kingdoms and duchies within Germany. Within the month of November 1918, all 22 of them abdicated, including King Ludwig of Bavaria. As you probably know, just 2 days later, on November 11th, the war ended when the armistice came into effect. In hindsight, there were several questions that historians have had about this whole episode. The first was, why did Admiral Scheer order the attack on the British Navy, knowing full well that it would probably result in the destruction of his own fleet? The consensus is that he wanted to attack the British to try to scuttle any talks between the German government and the Allies. If there was a major attack that inflicted huge casualties, even at the cost of his own ships, it probably would cause the Allies to walk away. The second big question was, why didn't the Kiel Mutiny and the subsequent German Revolution result in a Soviet-style revolution? You saw the creation of worker committees all over the country, similar to what happened in Russia. The reason is that the 14 points, which were the demands that everyone rallied around, were very limited in scope. They didn't call for sweeping political changes. It was mostly about the end of the war, which everyone was tired of at this point, and guaranteeing civil liberties. There also wasn't an equivalent of a Bolshevik party in Germany to spearhead a nationwide revolution. There were communists in Russia who thought that this was going to be the start of their grassroots revolution going international, but that never really happened. Not just in Germany, but anywhere else. What it led to was the end of the war, democratic reforms, and the Weimar Republic. Even without Plan 19 and the Kiel Mutiny, the war probably would have been over within a month anyhow. Nonetheless, the Kiel Mutiny served as the final nail in the coffin of the First World War, and the event which finally brought the war to a close.
The executive producer of Everything Everywhere Daily is Charles Daniel. The associate producers are Peter Bennett and Cameron Kiefer. I wanted to give a big thanks to everyone who supports the show on Patreon. Your support helps me put out a new show every day. And if you're interested in Everything Everywhere Daily merchandise, Patreon is currently the only place where it's available. And if you'd like to talk to other listeners of the show and get notified of future episodes and projects, please join my Facebook group or Discord server. Links to everything are in the show notes.